On a specified 1,000. Play.
This is Life of a Church Planter, a podcast created by church planners for church planners to wrestle with those unique issues, challenges, and struggles that church planners and missional leaders face. I'm your host and fellow church planner, Matt Peoples, and thanks for checking out this episode of Life of a Church Planter.
I'm Matt Peoples. I'm so pumped to be hanging out today with Mac Lake. Mac is somebody I was introduced to several years back, and I have grown so much in my understanding of leadership and leadership development from Mac. I think Mac has forgotten more about leadership development than most people have ever known. So I am so excited to get to spend some time with him. And today he's going to share with us 3 keys of developing leaders. So Mac, thanks for taking time with us today.
Oh, man, Matt, I love it. Remember that first time we met and the process you went through, how you just took to this stuff and loved it. So, man, I appreciate the opportunity to be on with you today.
Well, and I think that's what I love about your process. It feels so natural. You know, once you start picking up on those concepts, it's so easy for any church to integrate. I mean, we weren't this huge, 2,000, 3,000 person church, and yet we were able to integrate those concepts. And those are concepts that not only do we integrate at the church plant, but I'm, taking with me today. So it's huge.
Yeah, I love watching how different people apply it, because what I teach is a framework for building a leadership development strategy. I love how people take and apply it in different ways. And I had one guy in North Carolina who went through the whole process. And I was talking to him one day afterwards. He went, "This has changed the way I lead my family." I mean, he's got he's developing his kids and building content to disciple his kids. It's fascinating to see how different people apply it different ways.
Oh man, I love now you got to share really quick for everybody, because I know there's some people that won't know who you are. But they should, but they won't yet. And what I love is your story, how you kind of fell into this. Could you share that really quick before we dive into these 3 keys?
Yeah, sure can. Quick story is, grew up in West Virginia, small little church, and just had a passion for ministry. Went to Moody Bible Institute, went to Dallas Seminary, got into ministry. Never dreamed of ever really, being a lead pastor. But God called me to be a church planter, so I planted a church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and just fell in love with church planting, and led that for several years. And then God called me to come to Seacoast Church, which is a large multi-site church, to help them with the multiplication efforts of campuses. From there, God led me to Atlanta to partner with Brian Bloy, started a church planting network, which we built on these principles of leadership development. And so, and now today I run my own company called Multiply Group, and helping churches multiply, because for years now, my passion is multiplying multipliers and helping the church develop leaders, because I saw the desperate need. When I planted the church, we were reaching so many unchurched people, lost people, and we were growing, but I didn't have enough disciple makers to disciple these young believers. And I knew we had to do leadership development. And so that's when leadership development became a passion for me, because I thought, if we don't learn to reproduce, that will become the lid on the growth of our church.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point that you bring up as we're diving into this, because I think sometimes people hear leadership development, they say, well, what about discipleship? Or they hear discipleship and they think, well, what about leadership development? But for you, those 2 things aren't mutually exclusive.
No. Today, we're going to talk about 3 factors that we have to be aware of in developing leaders. And that's that first factor, Matt, is we have to change our paradigm of what leadership development is. Think about this. You're talking to a pastor, and they say, man, we got to start doing leadership development. We got to figure out how to develop more leaders. They're feeling the pain. Their staff's overworked. They don't have enough leaders. They can't populate all the leadership positions in their church. And then many of them, they go, hey, we want to be a church planting church. We just can't we can't raise up anybody from within. So they're feeling all these pains related to leadership development. So what do? They immediately think, well, we gotta have a leadership class and teach people to lead. Or, hey, let's start a residency or a university or Bible school here in our church so that we can put a bunch of people in a classroom and dispense the information they need in order to learn to lead. And so in that scenario, Matt, what happens is you find an expert that can dispense information and you put people in a classroom to get the information. The problem with that is when we utilize that approach, we never test for the student's comprehension or competency. Did they comprehend what the teacher said? And can they do it? Did they really develop that competency? I always say it's not leadership development if that leader is not developing and changing in their beliefs and their behaviors. If we've not changed their beliefs and behaviors, we've not done leadership development. And so what I advocate for is, hey, let's change the paradigm. Let's go back and let's think about how Jesus did leadership development. Many would go, wait a minute, Jesus didn't do leadership development. Yeah, he did. He really did. But he did it so differently than what we do. Jesus did it in context of ministry rather than in a classroom. Jesus focused on transformation, not dumping information. And Jesus, he empowered others to develop others. So let's look at his life. Okay, I studied his life chronologically years ago, and I was looking at his life through the lens of leadership development because I wanted to see how did he develop people. And so, Matt, here's what I saw. He encountered some of his first, what would be his apostles. He encountered a handful of them at his baptism. They saw his baptism. They saw the Holy Spirit. They saw the dove descend on him. They heard the voice of God say, "This is my beloved son who I'm well pleased." And they're like, wait a minute, who is this guy? And they go up to him and they said, "Who are you?" And he said to them, "Come and see." So they begin to follow him from Jerusalem back up to Capernaum. All right. Now, along the way, he would teach them. Then a few months later, shortly afterwards, as he walked the shores of Galilee, as he walked the shores of Capernaum, in that area, he looked at some of these guys and he'd say, "Hey, come follow me, come follow me." Now that was an invitation, not into leadership, but was an invitation into discipleship, into followership. And that's where Jesus began to teach them how to pray. And he began to teach them the basics of the faith and who he was. But then about 9 months later, in Luke chapter 6, Jesus went on the mountain and he prayed and he came down. And I love this passage. It says, and he called his disciples to himself. So at the foot of the mountain, there's a group of disciples. How many? We don't know. But there was more than 12 because the next part of the passage said, and from among them, he chose 12. So imagine this. He's standing there. Imagine, let's say there was 100 disciples there. And he looked out and he said, Peter, James, John, Andrew, he names the 12. He said, "You guys come follow me. Everybody else, thanks for showing up. Y'all, you're dismissed. Would you 12 huddle up with me?" And we'll go, whoa, wait a minute now. Why did Jesus do that? Because that's when Jesus he'd been discipling them. From among them, he chose 12 he would develop as leaders to carry the mission forward. Now, you keep moving forward 9 months later. Now, he did we don't have time to cover all this, but he did a couple of tours through Galilee, spreading the gospel through the 240 little villages of Galilee. And after they followed him and watched him do that, then in Luke chapter 9, he sent them out in teams of 2. This is where he began to empower them to develop leaders, because in Luke 9 to the 12 and Luke 10 to the 72, he said this: "Pray to the Lord of the harvest that he will send forth workers." The word "send forth" means to violently grab somebody and pull them across a line they don't want to cross. So in other words, here's what Jesus is saying. Hey, I've spread the gospel through these little 240 villages. As you go and present the gospel again, look for people who had responded to the gospel earlier and now call them into leadership, because we need local pastoral presence in these villages. These were strike teams. These were teams of two that were going in, they were missionaries and coming out. And Jesus knew they needed local leadership. So he told them, as you go, reproduce yourself. Now, Jesus could have very easily said, hey guys, while y'all go do that, I'm gonna put a seminar together and invite people from all the 240 villages of Galilee, and I'm gonna tell them how to be leaders. But he didn't do it. What he did is he sent the 12 out in twos, told them what to do, told them how to lead. When they came back, he said, huddle up, let's debrief the experience, because I want to make sure you comprehended what I told you to do, and I want to make sure you have the competency to do it again. That's how
and I love that, because we do it, we talk a lot about Jesus, but we don't necessarily do it like Jesus. And right there, you flipped two major paradigms on their head. We're very into the academic paradigm. It's like, I'm going to teach you a bunch of information, and that's going to change you. And you're saying, no, it's not about the information, it's about transformation, which I think is huge. And the other paradigm that you flip on the head is, this idea that let's just gather a ton of people in the room. And the more people we gather in the room, the more impact we'll have. But Jesus, after all the people are gathered in the room, he thins it out and he says, I'm going to pour very intentionally into these few. They're going to get most of my time. They're going to get most of my energy. And I'm going to make sure I'm kind of leading them towards something.
Yeah. What we do is we measure the effectiveness of our development based on the presentation of the trainer rather than the transformation of the learner. So in other words, if we get a really good speaker and we put them in front of 50 people and they teach leadership, and we get a Simon Sinek and we put 100 people in a room and Simon Sinek wows them with his brilliance around leadership, which he does. And these people leave. They've been inspired, they've been wowed, they've been impressed. But did they comprehend what he said, and can they do what he said? We don't know. We have no idea. But when you disciple leaders, you're walking with them. This is I did a study years ago. I looked at different pairs in Scripture: Moses and Joshua, Jesus and the 12, Timothy and Paul and Timothy, and all these. And there was one word that stood out to me, one 4-letter word that stood out to me in every one of these situations that I think is the missing ingredient today in leadership development. It's the word with. Jesus was with the 12. Paul was with Timothy. Elijah was with Elijah. They were with each other. And so when Jesus said, come follow me, I will make you fishers of men, when he said that, he was saying to them, it was an invitation into his life, not into his class. He was making a time commitment. And Matt, here's what I hear all the time. People are telling me, staff members are telling me, I don't have time to do leadership development. I don't have time to do leadership development. I'm going, you've got to be kidding me. So here's a phrase I tell staff all the time. You are the lead disciple makers in this church. And you should be, if you want to have an exponential impact with your life and in your church, you should be discipling leaders. Disciple leaders so here's the difference, Matt. We got a slide on this if you want to show it. There's a difference between leadership development and discipleship and leadership development. Okay. So discipleship, the primary focus is on intimacy with God. All right. In next one there. Yeah. Okay. Whoops, there's a misspelling. That's my fault. Discipleship's about leading yourself. Leadership development's about leading others. Discipleship's primarily about intimacy with God, whereas leadership development is primarily about influence for God. Discipleship is primarily, not only, but primarily about character, whereas leadership development is primarily, not only, about competency. And discipleship is teaching someone to live like Jesus, whereas leadership development is teaching somebody to lead like Jesus. And so the church does a decent job in teaching people to live like Jesus. We've got all kinds of discipleship programs and missional communities and Francis Chan, David Platt, Multiply curriculum, Navigator curriculum. We got all kinds of stuff. But what are we doing to disciple people to lead like Jesus? That's a missing element. And that, I feel like that's the central call of my life.
And that's huge, because it's, I think a lot of times we kind of put the two lists together and we say, well, it's this or this. But really what you're saying is here's the missing piece. Like we're doing a little bit of discipleship, but where's the leadership development in that, which is key if you want disciples who make disciples.
Right.
They need to learn how to be able to transfer what it is they're doing into somebody else's life.
Yeah, you have not fully made a disciple until your disciple has made a disciple. All right. And what we have in the church today is a bunch of, and I'm not even talking about leadership development here. I'm just talking about basic discipleship. When we disciple people, there are times we believe the completion of the discipleship process ends when they now have the theological knowledge or basic biblical understanding. Okay. Some people take it to another level. Okay. The basic discipleship process ends once they know how to share their faith. And that's great. These are all good things, but I think we have to take it another level. The basic discipleship process never ends, but it's at full cycle completion when your disciple has made a disciple. And a lot of times what we do is we run out and we disciple some people, and then we run around, we disciple some more people, and we disciple some more people as quickly as we can. And what we need to do is slow down, go the extra step, and teach our disciple how to disciple somebody, even if it's discipling a child or a teenager or a friend, whatever it is. How can they reproduce living like Jesus in the life of another person?
That's huge. Phenomenal. And that's just key one, So what would you say are some other key things in order for us to be able to make those paradigm shifts?
I think, another to make the paradigm shift for paradigm shift one or for key number one is we have to understand how people change. Okay, so there's something I call the triad of development. It's 3 overlapping circles. And think about this, okay? You've got somebody that you want to see learn to live like Jesus. Well, the transformation in their character and competencies need to take place. Let me give you an example. Let me give you a simple example everybody can understand. The first element in the triad of development is knowledge. So let's say that I want to have a great golf swing. Okay, so I go out and I buy a golf magazine. I read the article, 5 Steps to the Perfect Golf Swing. That does not make me a great golfer. It gives me the information. Now, that's where most churches stop in the leadership development process. We give people the information.
Yeah, it's like I gave you the information. Why aren't you a great golfer?
Well, yeah. How come you can't pray, or how come you can't lead this small group? I told you how to lead a small group. You sat through our 2-hour, turbo class on how to lead a small group. How come you can't lead a group? All right. It requires a second element, which is experience. And so experience is now I read the article and I go in my backyard and I swing my 9-iron 1,000 times every single day. Does that make me a great golfer? No, it doesn't, especially if I'm swinging wrong. If I'm swinging wrong 1,000 times every day, I'm ingraining bad habits that make me an ineffective leader rather than an effective leader. Matt, think about this. How many small group leaders have we put through our training at our church where we have dispensed information, giving them the knowledge of how to lead a small group? We release them into leading a small group. We've never tested for comprehension or competency, and they're doing it wrong week after week after week. They're lecturing, or they're giving, they let somebody overtalk and talk too much, or they get imbalanced in their approach and they're just hitting the head but not the heart or the hands, and they're doing this week after week after week for 5 years, 7 years, 9 years. I tell pastors all the time, if you would lift the curtain and look inside the homes at your small group leaders, you would be frightened at what you see going on there, because we've only given them the knowledge. We've never said, hey, now get the experience, practice this. But now here's the third element in the triad of development. It's coaching. So I read the article, Perfect Golf Swing. I swing 1,000 times, but now my buddy who's a golf coach is watching me, correcting it when I'm doing wrong, or saying good job when I'm doing it right. So now you give somebody you give somebody you take a leader, you put them in a small group with an experienced small group leader, and you say, hey, here's how you facilitate discussion. Watch me facilitate discussion. I want you to try facilitating discussion, and let's huddle up 10 minutes after group and talk about how it went. And generally, I recommend 4 questions. What did you see me do well? What would you have done different? What questions do you have, and what do you learn? Now, Matt, here's a we're all familiar when I ask people, how do you do leadership development? People are going to say, they're going to give you this answer. Okay. I do, you watch, you do, I help, you do, I watch, that whole process, right? Now, here's the problem. One problem is I've not many, but I've met everybody I meet can articulate it, but nobody I meet does it. All right. So let me give you an example why this doesn't work. All right. Hey, Matt, I'm going to preach. I want to teach you to preach. So I'm going to do, and you watch. Okay. So I'm going to preach this week. You watch. Let's get together and let's talk about it. Now, next week, Matt, you're going to preach and I'm going to watch. And you've never preached before. Matt, that's going to be disastrous. I'm setting you up for failure. So here's how it works. There's one, I'm not against that process.
Yeah.
But we're missing one element. Okay. Hey, Matt, I want to teach you how to preach. This week, when I preach, I want you to watch how I do an introduction. My introduction is going to last about 6 minutes. I'm going to hook them and grab their attention in the first 30 seconds. I'm going to raise the need so they know why they should listen to this. And I'm going to establish the context of the passage that I'm going to preach. Now, this Sunday, when I'm preaching, you listen the first 6 minutes to my introduction. You have my permission at that point to turn me off. And the rest of the time in that sermon, you sit there and you think about that introduction. And you write down your observations about what I did. And when church is over with, you and I are going to go to lunch, and I'm going to ask you, what did I do right? What did I do well in delivering my introduction? How would you have done that introduction differently, Matt? What questions do you have about doing an introduction? And what did you learn today about doing an introduction? Okay. Now, next week, Matt, I'm preaching on such and such passage. I want you to write an introduction. I'm not putting you up there, but I want you to write an introduction, and I'm going to write an introduction. We're going to compare to see what we came up with. All right. Now, week three, Matt, guess what? You're going to preach the introduction. This is my friend, Matt. Hey, welcome to the stage. Matt's going to co-teach with me today. Hey, Matt, kick off this message for us. And you do the first 6 minutes, you walk off stage. And now I'm discipling you, and we meet together and we talk about, but I'm discipling you in preaching. But what you do with the I do, you watch type of thing is you pick a competency that we focus on, an element, an aspect. And then next we would move to how do you put a body of a message together? How do you study? How do you put an outline? Whatever. I could spend a year with you doing this, teaching you how to preach. Just by breaking down.
That's huge. And I love that. I love what you're talking about, especially when we talk about this triad here, because just yesterday I was teaching my son to ride a bike. The simplicity of it. Everything in this triad of development is what I'm doing with my 5-year-old is we're learning to ride the bike. It's, hey, let me teach you about pedaling. Let me walk with you along. Now you got to experience it. At some point I got to push him, let go and let him feel what it feels like,
Yeah.
But I started thinking, well, what if I trained my son to ride a bike the way that we train disciples in the church? It's like, hey, I want you to, listen to me talk about riding a bike, watch me, just like you're saying, I do. And it's so convicting. It's like a knife to the heart. Cause I know I've shared with my staff, guys, I do, you watch, but it's huge. Just the simplicity of this. And you hit on something else that's really important, because as I think about the example of me teaching my son to ride a bike, we picked out those specific competencies. A competency for riding a bike at any level is pedaling. and understanding that when you pedal, the bike moves forward. When you stop pedaling, you're going to lose momentum. And so, one of the biggest things we're working on yesterday is just the pedaling aspect. And I love how you pull out specific competencies, and maybe just take a second, because I think we might be using a term that we're super familiar with
Right.
and other people don't know. When you say a competency, kind of explain how you break that down and what you mean when you say competency.
Okay. Yeah. Great question. So a competency, and the synonym is skill. Okay. Leadership skill. Okay. But a competency is an observable action that a leader does. It's an observable action that a leader does in leading. Okay. So for example, small group leader. If I look at a competency of a small group leader, I would word it this way, because I want to word it in a way that it's observable. So a competency of a small group leader is facilitate discussion in a way that everyone in the group engages and takes their next step spiritually. So if I was teaching somebody that, I would say, okay, watch me facilitate discussion. I want you to watch for the fact, is everybody in the group participating, or is only 20, 30% of the group participating? If only 20, 30%, then I'm not doing my job, okay? Mm-hmm. Am I driving that facilitation to a sense of discovery so that everybody knows to take what their next step is spiritually? Okay, so now when I'm get my apprentice to do that, then that's what I'm watching for. Did he facilitate discussion? Did everybody in the group engage? Did it lead them to a next step spiritually that they could take this week? And so now I know what I'm looking for. So it's an observable action that a leader does that I can actually see. And so many times what we say, so I do an exercise when I'm taking churches through Leadership Pipeline. I have them define their competencies. Here's what they come up with every single time: committed, responsible, integrity, on time. They define the competencies based on the character traits they're looking for and the pains they're feeling in the lack of responsiveness of their existing leaders, rather than what are the skills, the competencies. And I say 5. What are the 5 essential competencies to get a leader started to help them be successful in that role? That's what I'm looking for. So, for example, small group leader, how to build a biblical community, how to facilitate discussion, how to mobilize your group to serve, how to deal with difficult people, and how to identify and raise up an apprentice.
Because when you're figuring out those competencies and you're breaking them down, you're not saying we're going to figure out everything this person could ever possibly need. You're going to say, what's the essential things they need to just get going and to be able to start learning on the go.
Yeah. So
that is huge. Yeah.
Several years ago, Matt, I was the head of church planting for North American Mission Board, and I had a pretty large team underneath me. And I decided to leave so I could do Leadership Pipeline full time. So I took 3 individuals, and I said, "Hey, you're gonna be over this. You're gonna be over this. You're gonna be over this. I'm empowering you guys, and you are going to be leading at a different level, more responsibility because And I was doing this early on before they even knew I was leaving. But when I told them I was leaving, I had like 3 months. I said, okay, we're in the final 3 months together. Now, as we got into the final month of me working with them, here's what I told them. I said, you 3, you're 81% ready. You're 81% ready to step into this new role. Okay. Now, 81%, what are you talking about? I said, I can only get you to 81% ready because it's the last 19% that you don't know what questions to ask until you're wearing the shoes. You are not emotionally ready to receive the learning that I can give you until you're wearing the shoes and feeling the pain. So I can only get you to 81% ready. And my responsibility is to let go of you at 81% ready. And this is where a lot of leaders struggle. They will not let go because they're constantly looking at that last 19% and say, they're not quite ready. They're not quite ready. And so we hold on to them. We don't release. And when we don't release, they don't develop that final portion.
We're waiting for 100%.
Yeah, you're going to
Yeah,
let.
we're waiting for 100%,
We're waiting for 100%.
and you're saying 81.
81.
At 81, you need to be letting go because that's all you can really give them till they really feel it.
Your son, when you let go of the back of that bike, at some point he's going to be 81% ready. You're going to let go of the back of the bike. He's going to go about 30 yards, but his mind all of a sudden is going to go, oh no, I don't remember how to brake and stop. Dad told me, we practiced it, I don't remember, and he's going to crash. And he will learn more in that moment than you holding on and making him practice again and again and again. It's that last 19.
Yeah, that's huge. That is huge. And I think, if somebody pulls one thing out, I mean, there's way more than one thing to pull out, but that would be huge, because I think that's probably one of the things that really stalls out our leadership development in our churches is we're waiting till somebody's exactly where we're at, and we almost forget that we weren't there. It was learning on the go for us,
Exactly. Yeah. And for a lot of us, we're 20% ready.
Yeah. So you've talked about shifting the paradigm, and you've talked about, just this new paradigm for leadership development, which is incredible. So I hope you guys caught that. What is that second key that you feel like is necessary in really developing leaders from within?
Yeah, we have to intentionalize our process. Second key is intentionalize our process. So Matt, you know this, whenever I ask a pastor or a staff member, hey, what is your leadership development strategy? I get one of two answers. First answer is they laugh and they go, we don't have one. We don't have a leadership development strategy. And the second answer is, now ours is organic, which means they don't have one. They don't have one. And so you have to intentionalize your leadership development strategy. So I was talking to a pastor one day. He said, hey, can I meet with you and talk through leadership development? And I said, yeah, it'd be great. So we sat down and we're talking. And I said, okay, tell me what's the problem. What are you doing at your church? What's the problem? What are you struggling with? He said, Mac, I got 6 guys that I've spent a year with these guys. We meet every month. We're going through leadership books and I'm pouring into them. I meet with them every month. And he said, they love meeting and going through the leadership stuff. But I said, okay, what's the problem? He said, they're not leading. He said, they're not, I don't see them leading. And so here's the question I asked him. I said, what are you developing them to? And he said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I said, you got to know what you're developing them to. All right. Mm-hmm. I said, now here, I explained the leadership pipeline to him. Now show this next slide of the structure. I do an exercise with churches where I have them draw their organizational chart for each ministry. All right. And when you look at the organizational chart for each ministry, here's your student pastor. He's at the center and all leaders report to him. He's got a 1-32 ratio. You got these other ministries. They're all aligned differently. There's different terminology. There's these outrageous ratios of 1-27, 1-32, 1-15, all this sort of thing. So what you see is we're structured for function, but not for development. And so when I ask him, what are you developing to? He didn't know because he has a messy structure. Go to the next slide. So this is how you structure for development. I call it the generic leadership pipeline. Every church and organization should have a pipeline from where they develop leaders from one level to another. Okay. The bottom of this pipeline is the biggest portion population of your leaders. This is lead yourself. These are people who they joined the greeting team. They joined a small group. They're attending your church. They're simply leading themselves. And it's that pool of people you look at and say, hey, who can we get to lead a team? Or who can we get to lead a group? Who can we get to lead a children's class? Whatever it is. And so you identify some people and you move them to the next level and they're leading others. Now, once somebody leads others for a period of time, some of those people, not all of them, will move up to the next level, which is leading leaders. Now they're providing leadership, not for a team, not for a small group, but they're providing leadership for some of your leaders. Now, most churches, what they do is they move somebody to that level and they give them administrative responsibility, not leadership, not spiritual leadership responsibility. And so it just becomes a taskmaster for you to get more things done. But that is really a great scope of leadership responsibility. Next, you move somebody up to the next level. Some of those will move up to leading a ministry, students, groups, worship, whatever. And then some of those flow up to lead the church. So now that's the generic pipeline. Now what you can do, go to the next slide, is you label these for your church and you align it across each ministry. So like, for example, this is a large church I was working with. They have participants at the bottom. Team leader is the next level, coach is next level, coordinator, director, and then senior leader team, all right, or executive team. So that this church is a couple thousand people, so they have an extra bend in their pipeline. But now what happens is you have a development pathway, because every time somebody goes to one level of the pipeline to the next level, they've got to learn new skills. They have to learn new competencies. They have to understand there's a greater level of commitment here. And if people skip levels in the pipeline, it undermines their development. I remember we had a great small group leader. He was a great small group leader. We wanted to start a campus in his town, so we made him campus pastor. We jumped 3 levels, and he never could do it because we caused him to skip levels in his development. Now, let me go back to my story, to my buddy. So when I asked him the question, what are you developing them to? He couldn't answer it. So I said, all right, I showed him that leadership pipeline. And I said, now let's take your 6 guys. How many of those guys are not leading in your church at all? He said 2 of them. Okay, so I put their names right at the bottom of the pipeline. I said, how many of them are leading in student ministry, group ministry, whatever? He said 2 of them. So we put their name there. And I said, now, how about the other guys? What do they do? He said, well, the other 2 are on my staff. So I put their names up there. I said, here's your problem. You're doing generic leadership development. You're taking 6 people who are at 3 different levels of the pipeline, and you're giving them leadership principles, but you're not teaching them what to do with it because you're not applying it to a specific context or level of the pipeline. I said, you would be better off to take 2 of those, doesn't matter which 2, and let's say take the 2 leaders and develop them to the coach level, because now you're developing them to something. It's specific and it's strategic. So identify the competencies of a coach and train them in the competencies of a coach, get them 81% ready and release them to be a coach in your church. You'd be better off at doing that, because now they know what you're developing them to, rather than just teaching them generic leadership and they go, oh, thank you, you're making me a better leader. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what you want me to do with it in the context of your church. It's probably benefiting them at work. But how are they applying at church? We don't tell them. And that's why the pipeline's so important, because now we're developing people.
Yeah, and I think that point is huge, because about I think that concept's huge, because I was at a conference recently, and they were talking about it as kind of a metaphor of coaching on an athletic team. And it shot me all the way back to swimming. And what it reminded me was, you've got the whole team in the same pool, but you've got different lanes and different levels. Not only do you have different skill levels, so you've got one person that's just, getting into the sport for the first time, and you've got the person that's, all state, all conference level athlete. They're not going to do the same workout at the same pace, even though they're in the same pool, and you coach to those skills differently. But I think what you're kind of pointing out is a lot of times we lump everybody together. We don't do that basic assessment, and we say, oh, well, I'll coach you the same way I'm coaching everybody else. And, part of it's just really getting savvy about, what level are you at and how do I need to be coaching you for your level?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, Matt, you have 2 options. I don't know if you can hear me. The internet's sketchy, and I don't know if it's my end or your end, but are you picking me up okay?
I'm picking you up. Yeah.
Right. You got 2 options. All right. So option 1 is I'm going to take people at one level and disciple them to lead at the next level. Option 2 is I'm going to take people at an existing level and teach them to be better at what they do. So I might take 5 of my small group leaders and meet with them, not to move them up, but to make them better at what they do. So those are the two options: move them up or make them better at the level they're at. But you don't.
Well, I think that's huge, because
don't combine them.
I think a lot of times you see like a pipeline and you assume that everybody always has to move to that next kind of stage in the pipeline.
No. Yeah, because not everybody has the calling to.
I think that's huge. So what, as we're coming into it, what would you say is this third key that you feel like, really needs to kind of be in place as you're trying to kind of lead from within?
Yeah, you got to measure progress. So I'll tell you what happened to me years ago. Years ago, I was chaplain for the high school football teams when I was a church planter. So my church was, I think church was about 3 years old when this happened. So I'm on the sidelines during one of the games. We're getting beat. Coach is frustrated. He's pacing up and down the sidelines. He reaches in his back pocket and pulls out a piece of paper. He looks at it, flips it over, looks at it. It's a laminated piece of paper. He's frustrated and he throws it. When he threw it, it floated out about 15 yards out on the field. So between plays, I ran out there and I grabbed the piece of paper and I brought it back and I looked at it. I didn't know what it was. I looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, this changes everything for me. Here's what the paper said. It said offense had all 11 positions and all the players that could play those positions. Flipped it over, defense, all 11 positions and everybody could play those positions. I took that piece of paper, I rolled it up and I stuck it in my back pocket. Our church was about 3 years old. We were running about 350 at the time, and I had several staff. So I took it back to my staff on Monday morning, made copies for everybody, passed it out to my staff, and I said, guys, I owe you an apology. I said, a high school football coach who's playing a silly little game, which I love, which has no eternal value, can tell you the depth of his team. He's got a depth chart. I call it a team picture. He's got a picture of his team on a piece of paper he can look at and see the depth of his team. I'm leading the local church, the most significant organization on the face of the planet. And I cannot tell you guys the depth of our team. I can't tell you who's on my team, what level, who's on our team, what level they're at, who are leaders, who are coaches. I don't know. And I didn't even know pipeline back then. And I was like, I don't know. And so here's what I want from you guys. By the end of the week, I need your depth chart. Who's playing what positions for your ministry, and who are you developing to move up, and who are the potentials, who's sitting on the bench that could move up, all that sort of, and everybody turned it in. And then that's a discipline that I've maintained for years with teams I've worked with. Once a quarter, we look at the team picture and say, okay, who's on the team? You can show that slide with the names on there. So once you have identified your leadership pipeline, you put the names of people in and you begin to identify. For example, you'll see asterisks by some names. These are people you go, hey, these people, they're solid. They're probably not going to move up for one reason or another, but they're solid, man. We love them at this level. They're valuable. The arrows up indicate you look at the names of people on your team and go, who has potential to move up? Who's got potential to go to that next level? And then when I do this exercise with churches, I have them put a third symbol on there. It's a cross with a circle around it. And that indicates who are the potential church planters, 15 years old and up, that are in our pipeline that we can intentionally begin to raise up as leaders, coach level, director level, so that we can teach them one day to plant a church out of our church.
I love that concept of 15 and up, identifying who are the church planters, because we talk a lot about, hey, we want to be churches that plant churches, but does anybody really know how it digs down farther than that? And I love just the simplicity of that, but the intentionality of it too is saying, hey, there's something in this person. Let's be cognizant of it.
Yeah. Matt, there's a move among the American church today that I love. Okay. The move among the American church today is more and more churches are saying, hey, we don't want to be big and, we want to be smaller, but reproduce. And I love that. Now, here's the problem. most of them I talk to are asking this question. Hey, do you have any church planters that we're looking for a church planter? It's well, everybody's trying to find a church planter rather than develop a church planter. So
you're hitting too close to home, Mac. You're hitting too close to home. I had that conversation.
So get this, Matt. Here's the deal. We're going, where are the church planters? We don't have a church planting problem in this country. We think we do, but we don't. That is the fruit of our problem. A lack of church planters is the fruit of our problem. The root of our problem is a discipleship problem. So we don't have a church planting problem. We got a discipleship problem because we've not learned to disciple leaders the way Jesus did. We need some pastors to go up to the mountain and come back down and go, hey, you, come follow me because I'm going to take you to a whole different level of leadership. I'm going to teach you to live on mission. I'm going to teach you to influence people. I'm going to teach you to reach people. I'm going to teach you how to lead. I'm going to teach you how to expand and multiply your life. I'm going to teach you how to reproduce yourself. I'm going to teach you to do what the disciples did, to lead the way the disciples. You look at what these men did. The character and competencies, they sacrificed their life because they had the character that Jesus poured into them. And today in the local church, we have staff saying, our people aren't committed. Our people aren't committed. Well, doggone it. Call them to be with you and teach them how to have the character that lives a sacrificial life. They will never do it just by telling them. We got to show them, we got to push them, we got to inspire them, we got to model it, and we got to draw close to them. If you have a church of 100, you want 100 people to be sacrificially living for the sake of the mission and for the sake of the gospel. It ain't going to happen by preaching sermons 52 weeks a year. It's going to happen when you grab 3 men in your congregation and say, come follow me, come give your life with me, come follow me, I'll make you a fisher of men. Come into my life. I'm making a time investment in you. I'm going to teach you the character and competencies. And listen, this is going to hurt at times. It's going to be painful at times. It's going to force you to make hard choices at times. But you are going to live a life of significance for Christ because you're going to learn how to live a life of surrender and sacrifice for Christ. We got to get back to this.
It's huge. That's huge. And I think, number one, thanks for taking the time to dig into those things because it is. It would be if everybody listening to this just did it with 3 people, it would be game changing.
Yeah.
Game changing. And I know that it's like drinking from a fire hose every time we talk. I love it because you exude this stuff. You've been doing it for years. And so one of the things I love is we actually have an opportunity to dig in because one of the ways I really was able to pick up more of this is I actually went through a collab process with you. And took time with our church, sitting down and not just learning the principles, but you are somebody that doesn't just teach, you do. And so, not only did we learn the principles, but then we sat down and started building out a pipeline for our church and started thinking intentionally about leadership development. In fact, you're sharing some of this stuff and I'm whipped all the way back to our church plant, thinking through the different pieces that we pulled together. So I know we've got a pipeline collab coming up here on the Northeast. We're going to be doing it in May. And so if you guys want to check that out, could you explain a little bit of what a collab pipeline is and what exactly we'll be doing in something like this?
Yeah, I sure will. So what we're going to do, Ben and I are going to come up, and Ben's been through the process. He's one of my certified trainers. And we're going to gather about 12 churches, and we're going to spend 3 days together. And I'm going to walk you through the framework of how to build out an intentional leadership development strategy for your church. We're going to walk you through the process of how to change your culture, how to build a structure for development, how to build an onboarding and training system, how to put together content that you can use to disciple your leaders, and then how to mobilize people to disciple leaders. So we'll take them through the full process. Then we'll do some coaching calls that'll follow up several months afterwards. We're going to give you a bunch of tools, a bunch of templates that you can use to help you build out an intentional leadership development strategy for your church.
And this is huge. And I love the 3-day intensive. So we'll do a month of coaching call with you, and you'll kind of set us up. And then the 3 day intensive. But don't worry, we're not like leaving you hanging with the 3 day intensive where it's like, hey, 3 days, you figured it all out. Go and do. That would violate every principle that Mac has just talked about. But rather, then we'll spend the next 5 months doing a monthly coaching call where you can really dig in, iron out kind of how that leadership pipeline is working. And as you're implementing it, really get some solid coaching on the implementation side of the pipeline.
Exactly.
So I'm pumped. If you're anywhere near New Jersey or near the area, it's cheap to fly in with 3 different airports you can fly into. You guys can come check it out and be a part of this in May 18 to 20. And of course, we're doing like an early bird special. But Mac, if somebody can't get out to this, you do these in other spots. How could they find out about other collabs that you're leading and even other resources? I know you've got a great YouTube page that you guys hit up as well.
Yeah, a couple resources. One, I've got a brand new book out called The Multiplication Effect. The Multiplication Effect teaches this process. So you can get that on Amazon. Just came out in February. My Multiply Group, the website, multiplygroup.org. You can get information on leadership pipeline, individual consulting, group consulting, things like that for that process. And then the YouTube channel, over 50 videos on leadership development. It's YouTube.com/MACLAKE, Mac Lake. Subscribe there. And we got a whole bunch more videos we're getting ready to upload here in the near future. So constant flow of leadership development videos there that are free.
That's awesome. We're going to link these resources out so you don't have to memorize all of those. But check out the books. Mac's got a few books out. His most recent, remind us of the title, is Multiply.
The Multiplication Effect teaches the process. And then there's another book called Leading Leaders. It's for that leading leaders level. It's 6 discipleship sessions you can use to raise up people to lead leaders. And I always recommend start it with your staff so they understand it, and then empower your staff to raise up that coach level, coordinator level. But that's called Leading Leaders. That's on Amazon as well. Or if you want bulk copies of that one, just email me directly from my website, and we can get you a big discount on that.
That's awesome. Mac, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to pour into us today. If you guys want to see more resources, more of those links Mac's talking about, go to www.lifeofachurchplanner.com. That's www.lifeofachurchplanner.com. We'll have all those resources linked out, as well as future webinars and also links to be able to sign up for the collab if you're interested. But Mac, thank you so much for pouring into some guys today and for taking the time with us.
Been fun, Matt. Love what you guys are doing. It's been fun hanging with you today.